Okay, so I'd like to get started, and I guess there's two things that we're interested in talking about, and I'm not sure which one to talk about. So the first subject is wireless radiation, which is all the stuff from our cell phones and routers and Wi-Fi's, and that's the topic that we've spoken about at every Real Truth About Health conference. And then there's a new topic, I guess it's not new, but it's newer, and it's 5G. And that one seems a little, well, they both are concerning. This seems a little more out of control. So I guess I'd like to open up by asking each of you to be very brief, just take 3 minutes, and just tell us what exactly we should be concerned about. In other words, most people are not talking about this in regular mainstream circles, and yet you're talking about this a lot. So either you're making a big deal about something that's not a big deal, or a lot of people are not getting the information and not informed. So if you could each open up with what is on your mind. Why are you writing books about this? Why are you talking about this? Why are you lecturing? Why are you putting all your life's focus on this topic? What is on your minds? And even with Gabriel and Brian, you have thriving health and nutrition practices, and all of a sudden this is something that both of you are speaking about. So if you guys could explain what's going on with these topics, why you're talking about it, and bring us up to date with what's on your minds about this. Push the button.
I think that 5G and wireless in schools, it's all connected, because the amount of exposure we have now in schools is not safe. And we're talking about increasing those levels drastically using all kinds of new devices that are going to be interconnected, testing 5G in schools, and it really requires everyone coming together on this issue to protect our kids, because they will have a lifetime of exposure to this. And whereas in other countries where they're removing the wireless, especially for the younger kids, and having those conversations, in the United States, we're just beginning that process in terms of having that conversation. So I think that this is an emergency in our schools, actually. And we have a lot of work to do.
Well, I couldn't agree any more that it's an emergency. It's very serious. My role in life, Steve brought up, what are you guys doing all this other work and 5G? And it's because the very life of the planet is affected. Like we talk about the global electric circuit, which has to do with all our physiology for all life, not just humans, all life. And we have the Schumann resonance. When that's disrupted, lowers the melatonin, that's connected to cancer, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and a host of other things, particularly mental problems, anxiety, paranoia, depression. Really well documented. There's over 10,000 papers. Some people say 25,000. I'll stick with 10,000 that show that 2, 3, and 4G are causing problems. So I see the 5G issue as a major threat to not just all of humanity, but to the whole living planet. So that's why I'm talking about it.
When they created electric, they realized that it was hazardous for human bodies and human cells. So eventually they made it so they put rubber on that, natural rubber, latex, that in some way neutralized it. When they rolled electronics out, they also knew that it was dangerous. How can you not imagine that we can communicate thousands and thousands of miles distance, and this invisible wiring doesn't permeate you and other life forms? So of course it is. But when they really became bizarre is with 5G. And I'll elaborate on this later, but try to be concise now. I've had meetings starting 4 years ago. I've actually added a class that I personally teach at Hippocrates on this particular subject. because a former CIA official came through Hippocrates Health Institute and warned me about this. And I was hoping he was wrong. Every once in a while, this stuff becomes so overbearing to me. You know, I want to think something's normal, but sadly, the older I get, it's very hard to find normal in our world. And what he told me, it was really hard to believe. But he said, for 3 generations, 5G has been used to maim people. We also have a podcast and a radio program. It's on every Sunday morning at 9. And I interviewed a young man, philanthropic young man, who made a incredible documentary that, please write this down and please view it. It's called 5G Apocalypse. And there it, much more in detail, gave me information from ex-military people, how they used it in my heritage, in the Irish, in Northern Ireland, and how they would put people in hospitals, et cetera. So this comes out of the Pentagon, and they just rolled it off the shelf. And later I'll tell you about how 4 months ago I had a meeting with the gentleman who rolled this out in Europe.
I can tell you why I wrote the book. It's because on the research side, the science side, there was a preponderance of evidence that directly linked the use of technology, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cell phone use, directly to very serious problems with cancers and a far more greater set of intrusion to the body that has created dysfunction of the body, and sometimes it breaks the body down, and it's critical because of the exposures. And it was saddening me that we had so much evidence, yet no one knew. It wasn't common knowledge. If you know the courts, they argue that you should have known about it. We didn't know about it. So we were pretty frustrated that there was so much science we knew. We understood the mechanics of the breakdown to the body, and none of us knew it. So that's why we wrote the book. And why now? It's so pervasive, almost every child. There are more toilets in the world. There are more people using cell phones than toilets in the world. It's pervasive use. And all our devices are generating emissions. So all of a sudden you're in an environment where these many, many sources of emissions that potentially can be dangerous to you. And 5G, and I can only extrapolate, makes it worse in time. Why I extrapolate? Because there's no research. We really don't know. But I can tell you at 20 gigahertz, your immune system is impaired. It suppresses your immune system itself, and the bugs in your gut love it. It propagates the gut, not necessarily the bad or the good, but the bad as well. And so I thought it was time to let as much as I knew about it and try to share it with you. So that's why I wrote the book.
"5G is the latest and newest technology being pushed by telecommunications companies that promises to have faster downloads. But what it requires, in addition to billions of new interconnected devices, are millions of new short cell towers in front of our homes. And there's actually a lot of research showing that the technology that we have now, and those frequencies will be used in 5G, is harmful at low levels, as you were just talking about. So we don't expect 5G to be necessarily safer because it's using higher frequencies and the lower frequencies that we're using now.
As I mentioned before, there's over 10,000 papers that show 2G, 3G, and 4G are dangerous. Other research has shown 5G is at least 100 times more dangerous, more powerful. So let's just start there. We're dealing with something at least 100 times more deadly. Now, I do a lot of work with diabetes, and what we know with cell phones and all the electromagnetics is that people are becoming more electrosensitive. Around the world, it used to be 3%, now it's 10%. I have clients who literally have to go out into the wilderness to control their blood sugar. Literally, I don't mean metaphorically. And because when they get into anywhere, cities and so forth, it's like their blood sugar is completely out of control. We know the cell phones are associated with increased parotid cancer and brain cancer. That's just a fact, okay? And our kids are more vulnerable because their skulls are thinner. So my focus, first of all, I have the education, and really it's a political question and an awareness question. The second level, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, how do we protect ourselves? So I spent a lot of time with that and have come up with some levels of 5G protection. I even have a little video how I'm able to walk up right to a 5G tower and not be affected by certain things you can wear. But it's a more of a global problem. We're looking at where we live. We're looking at our windows being openings for it. We're looking at the smart meters, which are not too smart, affecting us. And they can target these things with the 5G. We're looking at our houses, our homes, our skin, our sweat glands are like antennas for the 5G. So it has to be approached on multiple levels to personally protect ourselves and our family and our houses. And we'll talk about that in a little bit later. But the most important thing, obviously, is political, getting them to stop it. I am working with a group who has been successful in certain ways, not with 5G, but by suing or threatening liens against major corporations for doing these things, and they're just completing. I just heard about it 2 days ago that they read it to me. A way that we can put liens against these major corporations who are bringing 5G to this world. So that's really, because we're not really going to, the politicians are compromised. But people listen to money, and if you know that there's a lien that's going to be charging you, $25,000 a day, you're going to think about it. And there has definitely been some victories, particularly around the use of smart meters. So there are things we can do, protecting ourselves and also acting politically. So that's kind of where my focus is, more on the protection, but the political protection with the liens. I'm not sure how we're going to get that out, but maybe through the newsletter or something like that. It's just almost ready, but it's not quite there yet. It's a really, really good document. So those are things we can do, but we have to see it, the global picture. As I said, the global electric circuit that controls all our physiology for all life on the planet, as well as the Schumann resonance, which is in essence the pulse or heartbeat of the planet. We're all resonating with that. Our hearts and our brains particularly are affected by the Schumann resonance, and when they start with the 5G, it's kind of predicted this is going to alter that Schumann resonance and throw off the whole synchronicity of us with life on the planet and also our heart and our brain function. So they're big issues. We have some solutions, both personally and politically.
Theodora, actually, you said an important point. It was the small cell tower that's really the new part of the network that the most disconcerting. And I'm going to tell you why. Sub-gigahertz frequencies are what we roughly operate at today. So Sprint announced a 5G service. It's a part of the fabric of service, but it's all sub-gigahertz range. It's 600 megahertz. It's much, much lower. It's the TV range that existed that's been reallocated by the FCC for 5G use. But when you look at that infrastructure that's becoming new, it's an interconnection to the house. When it gets to the house in front of your home, it's 23 gigahertz. It's 60 gigahertz. It can go up to 300 gigahertz. What does that mean? What they're doing is increasing the frequency rate, and by the way, 23 gigahertz is 23 billion cycles per second. When you have 6 gigahertz, it's 6 billion cycles per second, so it's an order of magnitude higher frequency rate. But this is what's different, and this is what's concerning. The wattage that's being transmitted from the cell tower right in front of your house is 20 watts. A cell tower 5 miles away uses 60 watts. And all of a sudden, you're being bombarded with an emission at 20 watts to get into your home. That's not all. It turns out that with 4G and 3G and 2G, they used digital signals. They encode the signal, and it can be TDMA, CDMA, GSM. There's a lot of different ways of encoding. Those encoding impact the body differently. And so when you talk about a breakdown of a cell, you're talking about the constant pulsing, the on and off to the body, to the cell, and that breaks it down. With 5G, there are 2 of those. It's beaming that takes 2 signals and converges that onto the cell phone. That's very different. And we know if you look at the history of the testing and the study work that we've done on 1 signal, you now have 2. Is that going to impact the body? Well, we know 1 does. What will 2 do? I don't know. But we know it may have an effect on the body, and that's why we have such concern. It's the higher rates, it's the higher power levels, and it's the way it's being transmitted that is potentially endangering our bodies.
Add something? There's also, and if you go to we've tried to put everything up online, but we've had a lot of medical conferences and scientific conferences where we have physicists who have looked at the impact of the higher frequencies on the sweat gland and found that the sweat gland acts as an antenna, and it preferentially, very intensely, is absorbed into certain structures in our skin. But also, the antennas are going to have everything that we have now, and in addition, 5G. So it's not that they're going to swap something out and put something in. They're actually going to add it on. And then phones, which will cost, I think they cost over $1,000 right now, so majority of people don't have them. But they'll come down in price in time. They will have both the 4G technology, and they'll also have the 5G on it, and it'll be able to toggle back and forth. So if you ever hear that, oh, don't worry, 5G is just going to bounce off your skin and all of that, that is not true on so many levels. First, it doesn't bounce off your skin. It affects your skin. It's going into your skin, and then also it's going to have all the frequencies we have now that are documented to have harmful effects in a substantial body of published research. So just wanted to add that.
Okay, so just to clarify and sum up, if someone is completely selfish, doesn't care about anything or anyone, they only care about themselves and have no interest in anything but themselves, what exactly is the reason for them personally that they don't want 5G towers going up and 5G Sprint or Verizon going up? What exactly is the concern to them in the next 5-10 years to a person who doesn't care about this subject, doesn't care about anything? What exactly is their concern about this technology? How will it affect them?
I want to add one small thing and then go on that answers that question. So there's research where they've looked at communities where they put in the small cell deployment. Not necessarily 5G, because that's only in test cities and not everyone's using 5G technology, but they've looked at cities. This is on our website on Science on 5G. They looked at some cities, and then they also looked at cities that didn't have the small cell infrastructure. And it is documented that the everyday, nonstop levels of radio frequency radiation are increased quite substantially in some areas from having all of these antennas in front of homes, which you would expect. So it will overall increase the levels that we're exposed to. I wanted to just add that.
We have cumulatively science over generations that tell us all of this technology is bad. We've just told you something the scientific community taught us. We're not physicists, but physicists tell us this is 100 times more damning than everything that's been bad that we know is bad. The organization you represent works with Stanford University, works with the University of California, worked with Yale University, Dr. Davis, my colleague, Dr. Hardell, a Swedish oncologist. He's done research also. This is the people I've been learning from. As a matter of fact, one of the most brilliant things I've seen in the last year is Dr. Davis when she was at the University of Sydney. It was very, very clear. So I can give you a brief thing. Cancer will happen. It's already happening. Stanford showed that children especially, putting cell phones with 2 and 3G, they get cancer tumors. And I can confirm that because I'm dealing with those kids with cancer tumors. They come to Hippocrates in boatloads today, and cancer was non-existent in children when I began my work a half a century ago. We've all mentioned here, and there's evidence of this. This isn't like crazy people with conspiracy theories. They are altering your mind. Are you going to be happy? Are you going to be stressed? Are you going to be anxious? Are you going to sleep well? Are you not going to sleep well? How about your children who can't have babies? 1/3 of the married people in this country and around the world now, in the developed world, as we say, are struggling to have babies. And it gave birth to something called the fertility industry. That, by the way, those poor women hardly have babies, but they show up at Hippocrates with cancer 5 years later, 4 years later, et cetera. And so the side effects I'm now bringing up too. Neurological problems. I've seen a boom in multiple sclerosis, as an example, and other neuron diseases and neuropathies. And people are sitting in front of televisions with cell phones in front of them, laptop computers on their genitalia. I see testy cancers shooting up like this. Used to be a rare thing. I see ovarian cancers. And cervical cancers are viral, but the amplification of cervical cancers. So that's why a person who's only worried about themselves should really worry about this. Now, let me expound on this. So I went out of my way 4 months ago when I was in Europe to have a meeting with a man that rolled this out. He's a Portuguese gentleman, a Ph.D., who, by the way, lives in Norway, and they are way ahead of us. So much so that the politicians in Europe are saying, we don't want 5G where our families are, because we know it gives you cancer. We know it's neurological, and we know that governments are going to use this to alter your consciousness. And so in Geneva, Switzerland, and in Belgium, where in Belgium the EU is, Geneva is where the UN is, they've just banned 5G. In Brussels. They've just banned it. Where I live in Palm Beach County, because an illustrious character that's running the country now lives, they're trying to ban 5G. So they don't give a damn about you and your families. They know what's going on, and they're basically saying, we don't want our families to be exposed to what your families can be exposed to. Now, these are not things we're making up here. I'd love any of you to challenge anything that we're saying here tonight. These are factual statements. I only come here to give you factual statements. So there is a overwhelming foundational body of evidence on what previous technology has done. We don't have to wait. You know, it sounds like we're a little tenuous here. We're not tenuous. This shit's bad. It's going to kill you. It's going to kill your children. It's going to amplify disease, and there's no question about that.
The media and politicians and universities are 3 separate situations, so we do present to all of them. There hasn't been, I want to go to the federal level, there has not been a congressional hearing on cell phone and wireless radiation since 2008 and 2009, and at that time, Dr. Davis presented, as well as several other eminent scientists. You can go online and watch the presentations. What came out of that is the call for a review of the limits by the Government Accountability Office. But then the FCC is captured by agency and is saying there's no problem. So there's work, when word gets out and they hear the information from the scientists, we find that there is action that's taken. At the 5G New Hampshire Commission on 5G, They are listening to the scientists. We presented to Colorado and cities in California, to the Mexico Telecom Authority. When India, the government of India, decided to look at this, they had an interministerial group come together to look at the impact to birds and bees, and they actually made their radiation limits far more protective. They dropped them to 1/10 of what they were before. But they have to have that information, and there has to be a process where they're looking at that information. So for example, we're calling for a congressional hearing. If there's something you can do today, I have an idea of many, but contact your elected officials, show them the letters that have been written by members of Congress who've been presented with this information, and call for a congressional hearing on this issue where the scientists can present the science and the policymakers can hear it. That's one thing. Now, when we talk to the media, I'm going to tell you that we're challenged because they don't have much of an attention span, and they want to hear it really quick, and then they get on the phone and they talk to industry-funded scientists who say there's no problem. And we work really hard, and there have been several pieces that have come out where we have been talking to the reporters. There's a piece coming out soon that I hope it's coming out very soon, really giving them the background. When you have an investigative reporter, they take the time to understand the issue, to look at who they're speaking to and who's funding them. I mean, this is, it's quite a challenge, but it's happening. You can look at The Nation did a report on this. We have several, which we have up on our website, of investigative reports that have been done looking at this issue. But we really need to get to the federal level. At the state level, things are happening. I mean, Vermont, New Hampshire, Oregon just passed a bill to review the effects of radio frequency and wireless in schools with a focus on schools. So that happened by being presented the information. There has to be space to do that. There has to be a forum to present the information so that they can receive it. And we often get shut down because, you know, you can send a million emails, they're not going to read them. Things are changing. People are actually having success at stalling the rollout of 5G. So,
But if nothing changed, if it just continued full on, where are we going to be?
You know, I think our humanity is at risk, because how are we even going to be interacting with each other with all of these devices, not to mention the electromagnetic fields, the overstimulation of our brain. Our brain goes into fight or flight with all of the screen use, be it wireless or not. I just can't even wrap my mind around the unbridled rollout of this technology. I'm already in shock at where we are now. So I know that scientists are also talking about increased, everything we just talked about, increased cancers and immune system dysfunction. So I have my eye on the prize of slowing this down so that we can have a more responsible look. And we haven't even talked about blue light, which is all wrapped up in this, but you want to add in your thoughts?
Just wrap up 5G.
Oh, 5G, okay.
Okay, so let's, I'm an optimist with most things, but I realize when an international industry has already invested $500 billion, it's going to be very, very hard to slow this down. So it's not going to stop at 5G. They're already working on 6G.
And
it's not going to stop on 6G. It's going to go to 7G. So in 5 years, we won't be talking about this. We'll have a panel here and say, gee, are we going to be worrying about 7G? It's coming out. When we have our children not having the #1 killer of babies below 5, brain cancer, but maybe it's going to be catastrophic at that point. At this point, that's the fact. The #1 killer, disease killer, babies below 5 is brain cancer. I'll repeat, that was non-existent a generation ago. Neurological problems, okay? A lot of you are feeling them. Discomfort, you have pain, you can't sleep at night, in part, and if not in great part, depending upon if your head is next to the smart meter on the other side of the wall, Or if, by the way, you have live Wi-Fi on in the middle of the night when you're trying to sleep. Or how about if you combine those together and in your neighborhood they have cell towers? Well, you don't even have to be a reader. Just look at the documentary on cell towers in the middle of New York City, where they took mathematicians and statisticians and showed the closer you live to it, the more cancer you have, period. These aren't things we're worrying about. These are things we know about. The worry is that we're not doing enough about them. The next thing you have to understand is fertility. You know, yes, people will say, well, there's too many people on the planet, but when you're not fertile, you're sick. There's something going on with you. So it's not just representative that you can't have a child. That's a sad enough problem. But how about now you're well on your way to have a wide variety of other diseases? So the immune system's low, the soldiers are low, in your army you lose the war. And the war is every disease known to man. So this is nothing to tiptoe around and think, oh, we're going to get by this. Again, $500 billion is a pretty damn big investment. It's $500 billion. They're going to roll out about $2 to $3 trillion on this in the next 4 to 5 years.
I'll go to an extreme. I love Dr. Powell. He's one of the very first biochemists who actually broke down what happens in an exposure to the cell. He tells you how the calcium penetrates the cell. He tells you how it breaks the cell up. He shows you how it mutates the cell. That's very important. In his words, he thinks in 3 generations, we can't make babies. So the impact of 5G is a bit more catastrophic in nature in that sense. So you can't have babies. It typically takes 10 to 20 years, maybe 30 years before we understand what we introduced into our environment. I think in this case, it's going to be more accelerated. 5 to 10 years. Because it's going to be 5 and 10 years, and you're going to actually start seeing real evidence of the biological impacts because of the technologies we see. But by that time, it's a little late because we all are now suffering. Over the last 10 years, smoking cigarettes has been down by 50%. And I got to reinforce something people are saying. I don't think it's the cancer that's the worst place. It's the physiological and neurological impacts to the brain itself that controls your body that's going to be worst hit. We already know. We see changes in the frontal lobe, in anger, and all the control functions of the brain that are being impacted just from 4G. 5G, as I mentioned when I started, it's 2 signals hitting the head, not 1. Now there's 2. So, in my opinion, and it's not as bad as Dr. Powell says, but I think somewhere in between is very real, and in 10 years, we're going to have a serious problem that we may not be able to back out of.
So, obviously, it's a big
By the way.
problem, and it's urgent. I never entered a football game thinking we were going to lose. That's how I look at it this way. Yeah, we had an undefeated football team. It was good, but never entered thinking we were going to lose. And so my advice here is let's not think of the potential of what may happen in 5 or 10 years. It's good to think about because it's a good question, but it's very productive. And at the same time, we have to get clear that we're not going to lose this battle because it's a battle to protect the total living planet. Everything is at stake. So when we kind of take it that way and know in a way that there's really God in the world and something is going to happen, but we are the key players in that story. So if we take the attitude, we will win, we will prevail, just like we are with smart meters, which was undefeatable at some point, and we really put our energy and attention into it, That's the way we have to go. And with that, I'm going to just give a little prayer about merging the heavens and the earth, because that's exactly what has to happen here. We are talking about the heavens, the sky, and the earth, and it has to come back into harmony. The 20,000 satellites up there are not exactly bringing harmony. So, L'Shem Yakud Kudushabrihu, Ushinate, I had Shemuke Bavavke, Yudashlam Shem Kozrael Kolam, Amen. That, understand, our prayers do make a difference in affecting the outcome. So we have the power of prayer, and we have the power of entering with a positive attitude. We will win. And with that, may you all be blessed.
I just wanted to say, I think about this a lot, is like, if my kids get sick from this years from now, and they come back, and will they say, what did you do? Did you know? I mean, I think about, that's what kind of got me basically changing my whole life direction to work on this issue was, what do we do? Wait, I was like, hold on. Brain damage? Because there is documented brain damage from exposure. And I worked with kids with brain damage. I knew that, to me, the cancer was like, okay, but not everyone gets cancer. Maybe we can do these things to support, not that I'm saying cancer is okay. What I'm saying is, but the brain damage, if everyone is brain damaged, what do we do? How do we fix that, And so I just think about kids, did you know this? I mean, they're going to ask, did you know? Did anyone mention that there's all this science? It's all right in front of us. It's all here. There's no lack of science. There's just lack of political will. And when the history books are written, what were you doing? That's how I think of this, actually, issue. And that's what I've been telling our policymakers, too, is we're telling you this information, and now what are you going to do about this? You have this information. So.
My feeling is very similar to what you're saying. We are the ones that need to put the pressure on. And I'm going to use the word pressure because I think the politicians need that pressure to pay attention. They need, corporations need the pressure from us, as I say, with these liens, which are legal vehicles that don't require a court that you have to convince that are part of the system. We can put pressure on, but we have to do it. So what's key here is simply making that decision that this is urgent and we have to go for it. And the question is, well, if you knew, why didn't you do something? Well, now you know. So everyone here is part of, I know, therefore I must do.
So what we do know, and it was mentioned, but let's pull it together, that what differentiates you from all other life forms is your DNA. And these frequencies damage the DNA. That is the closest friend and ally to the immune system. So every single person who has ever recovered from every single disease any human has had through the history of humanity, it was their immune system that did it. Let's go back. The DNA and the immune system are being altered. Now, where does the immune system greatly come from? The intestinal tract. Healthy bacteria in the intestinal tract. And I mentioned this the other day, but it's worth telling because God has a better plan than we do sometimes. Mother's milk has colostrum in it. In the first minutes a baby suckles the mother, colostrum comes in, providing healthy, completely perfect, balanced, healthy bacteria if you live 150 years. That's a fact. We know in the past that Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola can disturb that. They look like Boy and Girl Scout camps compared to these frequencies. And so if it disturbs and opens up cells, it allows calcium to interchange with that, as has been represented and true. Can you imagine what it does to the bacteria? You're 2/3 bacteria. When I look at your physical body, so when you think somebody's sexy, think for a minute, 2/3 bacteria. Just wanted to be compatible bacteria at that point. So taking an appropriate probiotic is powerfully important. The distance is powerfully important, and I don't think we could have started any better than with what you said. She gave the most practical advice in this area. She's right. Don't use it. Use it as less as possible, and get it away from where you're hanging out 9 hours a day, 10 hours a day. How about your workplace? You're there 8, 9 hours a day. You know, do you have to have a workplace where you and your coworkers are being zapped? You know, we brought a physicist onto the Hippocrates property, and he created a shield on the Hippocrates property. And you can do these things. We worked with Russians and Germans who have the state-of-the-art technology. It's called high pulse. I never take this off. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Scientifically validated, and it's easy. You put it on. That's all it takes. But that doesn't mean you put it on and use 2 cell phones at your head. I think it's worth telling you that governments in the past did have a little bit of morality. And a guy that you'd never expected was called Bill Clinton. Because how Dr. Davis started is Bill Clinton, she worked with him. And he wondered if cell phones created brain cancer. So tell the rest of that story. Do you know that story? Okay, I'll tell it. Dr. Davis and I talked about this. So she was actually the woman who oversaw the science that was being done during the 8-year administration. He commissioned a $25 million study on cell phones' effect in potentiality with brain tumors. The study came back, said, no way, doesn't work, impossible. And Dr. Davis and her husband retired several years ago, and she's a prolific lover of science. And she reads it and reads it and reads it, and she's reading this study, and they were so sloppy they didn't segue the study. If you're going to cheat on a study, you have to be sophisticated enough to try to hide it. They didn't hide it. So the first part of the study said, yeah, it looks like it's doing it, and overnight, that was it. So she happened to hand-select scientists and called the gentleman that she knew at some level, and he basically admitted to it, the pressure that came in at that point. That's how Dr. Davis became incredibly upset about this, and literally is the #1 advocate in the scientific community, at least the original #1 advocate. Now, thank God there's a chorus of people coming. So you've got to protect your body by being healthy. You've got to avoid all of these things. You've got to make sure there's pockets, there's bags you can put. My wife and I have one you can put two or three cell phones in and put that into your purse so you're not carrying it on your body or in your brassiere. There's actually plastic that you put on your lap if you're going to use a laptop computer. And it does protect you. And there are these devices. There are screens. You currently may have a smart meter. There are screens that dramatically reduce the radiation that comes from that until we pull that off your house. And by law, you can pretty much demand they pull it off your house.